I was kind of expecting it.
I am.
I thought you were going to say Bregas. Yeah. Yeah, you could definitely distribute. Yeah. Do you know the combination? You know how to get in? It's fine. Shana? Yeah, middle. Correct. All right, Jabosai, good evening, or good Erev Shabbos. This is so special and so sweet and so beautiful, Baruch Hashem, to be able to do this together. Maybe we should, all right, we'll think about what we'll do in the future, Amirat Hashem, but it's so special, Baruch Hashem, to be here with all of you together. All right, we have enough of that. We got to do today, Baruch Hashem. Let us begin. Sorry. Okay. Let's begin. I think I'm good without me. Oh, you hear me all right? All right. I'll say today's daf is Lamed Gimel. I should say Friday's daf is Lamed Gimel. We'll say, so we are Amirat Hashem going to continue today. We are picking up today on Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, 32a. So we left off Elazar ben Masa. So the Gemara says as follows: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. Elazar ben Masya Omer, Abba Mereshkini Mayim, u'mitzvah laso. So we'll say what happens. So remember, we're talking over here about what happens in situations of conflict. Namely, there's a conflict between the mitzvah of kibbutz and a conflict ultimately again between some other mitzvah. So in this case over here, my father is telling me, go ahead and give me something to drink, and there's another mitzvah that I'm obligated to perform. So which one takes precedence? So the Gemara says, Maniach ani es mitzvah. Ultimately, Allah says, I'm going to leave aside the kibbutz av and I'm going to do the mitzvah. Why? Shani va'abba chayav b'mitzvah. Because my father and I are both chayiv to go ahead and serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So in other words, we'll say, what Allah is saying is like this: when there's a conflict between the obligation I have to my father versus ultimately again an obligation that I have towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because both my father and I are required, or obligated to serve the Ribono Shalom. Isi ben Yehuda, or even who says, if the mitzvah itself could be performed, in other words, the other mitzvah, so then so we'll say if the mitzvah, whatever the mitzvah is, if it could be done by someone else, then let someone else do the mitzvah. And do you perform the mitzvah of kibbutz avayim? Rav Masna said, halacha ki isi ben Yehuda. That is indeed what the Shulchan Aruch codifies. So if a person has two mitzvahs in front of him, one we'll call it a mitzvah of ben adam lamakom, the other or even a ben adam lachavero, the other kid avayim. So if possible, if someone else, if the person could outsource the performance of the other mitzvah to someone else, and thereby free up to go ahead and perform the mitzvah of kibbutz avayim, that is preferable. Incredible. I'm Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Shila, I'm Rabbi Masna, I'm Rabbi Chisda. Ha'af shemacha al kvodo kvodo mochel. Both say a father who is mochel on his kavod, right? A father who forgives his kavod is forgiven. What is forgiven? So ha'rav shemacha al kvodo ein kvodo mochel. But if a rav is mochel on his kavod, ultimately again his kavod is not forgiven. For Rabbi Yosef says, "Afilu harav shemacha al kvodo kvodo mochel." Not true. Even all. Right? Even ultimately, again, if it's Daf Yomi after 5 p.m. edition, right? This is it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? So you know what's great about this? That nobody flinches. That's what I love about I know. So again, so the Gemara says like this. So if a father is mochel on his kavod, so the kavod is mochel, right? A rebbe or a rav mochel on his kavod. The kavod is not machal. Kavod is not machal. Even if a rav is mochal on his kavod, ultimately again the kavod is machal. It's forgiven. Shnei v'Hashem holech lifnehem yomam. I will say it's fascinating. Why? Because in the desert, the Ribono Shel Olam himself cared for the needs of HaKadosh of Israel. So that was the Ribono Shel Olam, so to speak, being mochel on his kavod. He was forgiving his kavod because he was taking care of activities of daily living for others. So the Gemara says, "Amarav hachi ashta asam Hakadosh Baruch Hu alma dilehu v'tari dilehu machali likare." The Ribbon Shalom, everything belongs to Hashem. Because everything belongs to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, right? The Torah is His, therefore the Kud is His. Therefore, by extension, he has the ability to go ahead and forgive that covet, forgive that honor. On the other hand, Rabbi say, Amad Beis, good. Hacha, Torah dilehu. Rabbi say, but how could a Rav be mochel on his covet? After all, remember, the covet of a Rav, it's not his own covet. What is the covet? It's the covet of Torah. But the Torah is not his. So how can you, in general, you can only be mochel on something that is yours. If something is not yours, you can't be mochel. So if the covet of a Talmid Chacham, the covet of a Rav, the covet of a Rebbe, it's not his, it's Torah. So does he have the right to be mochel on it? Amarabba, in Torah Leibos is beautiful line. No, Torah is his. Where do we say from Dichsiv? Ubisora so Yomam Valayla. Rabbi said this is beautiful. What does the pasuk say? In his Torah shall he toil day and night. So Rabbi say, what do you see from this? When a person learns Torah, this is so beautiful. When a person learns Torah, the Torah it just makes it look more awkward. The person ultimately, again, when a person learns Torah, Rabbi say, the Torah becomes his. It's incredible. When you learn, before you learn, the belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Once you go ahead and you learn, that Torah ultimately becomes yours. Once it becomes yours, then halacha lamaisa, you have the right, you have the ability ultimately to forgive it. Ini, is that so? Is that so, Rabbi? So the Gemara says, V'ha Rava mashki behi lula dibrei. Rabbi, listen to this. Rava was at the chasana of his son. Such a beautiful game. And what was Rava doing at the chasana of his son? He was pouring drinks. Mamish and Yoni Diyoma, right? He was pouring drinks. So Rabbi says, obviously, again, for Rava to tend bar sodas, for Rava to pour drinks, would definitely be beneath his covet. So the Kasla Rapapa, all the Rafuna, Braid Rav Yoshua, the Kamum Kamei. Again, he poured a cup of wine for Rapapa, Rafuna Yoshua, and they stood up before Rava. Mikamei Rav Mari, or Rav Pinchas Braid Rav Chista, then he poured a cup for Rav Mari. They did not stand up for Rava. What happened? Rabbi say, Ikbid. Rava was offended. Rabbi say, it's always so. Rava was offended because he felt that these other Rabbanim were not displaying to him properly. Rabbi say, Lamed Beis 32b. We are now 7 lines down from the top. So Rabbi say, so Rava was offended because he wasn't given cover. Rabbi say, so what do you see from here? You see from here that even if a Rav is mochel on his cover, see here, Rav is pouring wine, which indicates that what? Why was Rav is mochel? Right? He's mochel. Otherwise, he wouldn't be fine for everyone. But even if a Rav is mochel on his covet is not forgiven. That's why when these other Rabbanim didn't stand up in front of him, he was offended. Rabbi said, I just want to point out, the fact that he was offended is not like an ego thing. The fact that he was offended is that Rav understood that he represented Kavod Torah, and a lack of respect was a lack of respect for Torah. And a lack of respect for Torah is a lack of respect for the Ribbon Shalom. So in that respect, that's why Rav got upset. Another story. V'amra hano Rabbanon, v'ano Rabbanon lav Rabbanon. These first set of rabbis, they're real rabbis. The second set of rabbis, they're not rabbis. They're like, oh, I say that all the time, right? And the Gemara says, "V'su Rav Papa hava maki behilula da Abba marberei." So we'll say similarly again. Rav Papa was once pouring wine for his guests at the chasana of his son, of Abba Mar. He poured a glass of wine for Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak didn't stand up. The ikbid, and ultimately again Rav Papa got offended. Once again, I will say, so what you begin to see is the fact that these Rabbanim are pouring wine indicates that they're mochel on their covet. But yet, when they get offended that other people don't respect them, that shows that the halacha is that even if a Rebbe is mochel on his covet, the covet is not machal, the covet is not forgiven, you still have to respect. So the Gemara says, good. So ve'ikbid, afilu hachi hidor mi'avet leibo. It says, well, maybe even if a Rebbe is machal on his covet, maybe the covet is machal. But I will say, maybe if the covet, even if the covet is machal, maybe still, nevertheless, others still have to go ahead and display some level of covet. Or say what the Gemara calls hiddur. So let's say, give an example. Let's say the covet I should have for a Rav, covet I should have for my Rebbe is when he walks in the room, I stand up. So let's say for argument's sake, a Rebbe is mochel on his covet, right? And let's say we say that Rav Machal Kvoda called the Machal. Let's say when a Rebbe is mochel on his covet, really the covet is forgiven. Even though it's forgiven, the Talmud or anyone else does an obligation to display some level of respect. We'll say, how do you see ever sometimes even when a person is not getting up, they move. Right? So in other words, moving self, just a movement. So again, that's not a full standing up. That's not a full standing up, but it's what the Gemara calls hiddur, right? It's a smaller display of honor. So the Gemara goes weiter. Even according to the opinion that says that when mochel on his kavod, ultimately the kavod is forgiven. Nasi shemachal kavod in kavod machol. If a nasi is mochel on his kavod, right? So remember again, nasi is also the head of the Jewish people. So ultimately, is not machal. Meisvei, is that true? Is that true? I said Rabbi Eliezer, Yoshua, Rabbi Tzadok. There was once a story. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Tzadok were sitting at a wedding feast in, I would say in Bnei Brak, but Beis HaMishta, and it doesn't say where. So we're at the Beis HaMishta of Beno Shel Rabbi Gamliel. So they were at Chassan of Rabbi Gamliel's son. Rabbi Gamliel was pouring wine for everyone. So what happens? Nasan HaKos Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Gamliel handed a glass of wine to Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer would not accept it. He wouldn't accept it. He felt that it would have been a lack of kavod to accept the glass of wine from Rabbi Gamliel. Thank you, Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel gave the glass of wine to Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua accepted it. Amrlo, Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer gave Rabbi Yeshua, right? Yeshua, what's the matter with you? Right? What Mazi Yeshua? Rabbi Gamliel, Omedu, Mashkalenu. You were going to sit here and allow Rabbi Gamliel to say. So Rabbi says, Rabbi Yeshua responds, Matzinu Gadol man of Sheshimish. We find someone even greater, Rabbi Gamliel, who served his guests. Who was that? Avram Gadol Hadar. Avram was the Gadol Hadar. Because of who made Alehem. And Rabbi say, remember again, guests came. Parshas Vayera. When the guests go up to Avram Avinu's tent, what does he do? He serves them. Rabbi say, not only does he serve them, but while they're sitting, he stands over them. So if Avram Avinu could go ahead and take care of his guests, Rabbi Gamliel could certainly do it. Maybe you'll say, well, no, it's different. Avram knew they were malachim. Maybe you'll say Avram knew they were malachim. No. He says, Lo nidmulo el aravim. They look like Arabs. They look like regular Semitic people. They don't look like malachim. So if Avram could serve his guests, why can't Rabbi Gamliel serve his guests? Incredible. Rabbi Tzadok says incredible. It's so beautiful. You could imagine this scene, right? They're sitting at the wedding. This is probably after the chuppah during pictures, right? While everyone is sitting around watching hours fly by, right? So again, they're sitting and it's incredible. Rabbi Gamliel serving wine, and they're like debating. They're debating about. So Rabbi Tzadok says, I don't understand. What's the matter with you guys? He says, why are you bringing a raya from Avram Avinu, from a person? As great as Avram was, he was a person. Bring a raya from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu meishiv ruchos, umale nesim, orid matniach hadama, v'orich shulchan lifnei kol echad ve'echad. They will say, you know what the Ribono Shel Olam does for us? You know what he does for us? Everything. Everything. It was a Gemara to learn on Erev Rosh Hashanah. What does the Ribono Shel Olam do for us? Everything he does for us. Literally translated. He goes and he brings the rain. He moves the clouds, causes things to sprout. He sets the tail before everyone. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu could serve us, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu could serve us, Rabbi Gamliel could serve us as well. Obviously, we wouldn't make him serve us, but if he wants to serve us, we absolutely have the right to accept this. Rather, we have in the halacha as follows. This is halacha. Even the opinion that says that a nasi who is mochel on his kavod, right? That if a nasi forgives his kavod, ultimately again the kavod is mochel. Melech shemachal al kavodo ein kavodo mochel. If a king tries to forgive his honor, ultimately again the honor is not forgiven. Shneimar som tasim alecha melech. Place upon yourselves a king. Shetei emaso alecha. That ultimately again the fear and reverence of the king should be upon you. So here's how he paskin. A father permitted to be mochel on his kavod. A rebbe is permitted to be mochel on his kavod. A nasi is permitted to be mochel on his kavod. A melech, a king, may not be mochel on his kavod. That is the one area. Now, I will say there is also a difference in the world of Rebbeim. There's also difference between a Rebbe Mufhak. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. Rebbe Mufhak, regular Rebbe. But Allah Chamaisa says everyone except the melech has the ability. This is very important. Why? We're going to get into. We already discussed the halachas of kibbud aveim and mora. Right. So one of the ways in which the Gemara says you're supposed to go ahead and be mechabed your father, your parents, stand up when they walk in the room. But let's say it's very common that children don't stand up for their parents when they walk in the room. So what's the pshat? So the Aruch HaShulchan has a fascinating. The Aruch HaShulchan says essentially contemporarily, and already he's in the 1800s, contemporarily there is an implied mechila by parents. that parents are mochel. Parents are mochel, again, on this specific, not on their covet in general, right? But parents are mochel on the concept of standing up, which is why it says, you'll find many dedicated, loving, and attentive children who don't stand up for their parents when they walk into the room. Interesting idea. So Gemara says as follows: Tan Rabbanan, mipnei sakum. So the pasuk says again, you shall get up in front of an old person. Yachol afilu mipnei zaken hashmai. You might have thought even before an old person who's ignorant and evil. Tamalomar zaken vein zaken lachachar. Also remember again, zaken itself is an acronym for zesha kana chachma. It's talking about a talmud chacham. Shnei mar asvali shivim ish miziknei Yisrael. Rabbi Yossi Lili Omer ein zaken elamisha kana chachma. Here it is. We'll say, what's a zaken? Zaken doesn't just simply refer to biological age, but zaken refers to someone who has acquired wisdom. Someone who's acquired. Good. It was Daf first. But come, we could do. I could take a little harmony for Daf Yomi. I could. So the Gemara says as follows: Shneimar Hashem Kanani Reish Yachol Yamod Mipanav Mimachal. So you might have thought maybe you should stand up for an older person, even right as zaken, even from far away. Tamalomar Takum V'Hadata. Pasuk says you stand up, and it should be a beautiful. Lo Amarti Kima Elubamakom Sheish Hider. The time you're obligated to stand up for is when there's beauty. We'll say, when is there beauty in it? When it's clear that the act of standing is for the zaken. It's too far. The act of standing doesn't correlate, doesn't connect with a particular zaken. Therefore, there's no covet. You might have thought maybe again the obligation to honor a zaken is even done financially. Just like ultimately standing up doesn't cost you any money, so to the way in which you're obligated to honor someone who is old, a zaken, is through non-financial means. But you're not obligated to. I'm sorry. Oh, we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So it says I might have thought, what if I'm in the bathroom or in the bathhouse and a zaken walks by? Maybe I should stand up over there just like that. So it says no. The standing up obviously has to be something that's demonstrative of respect. But Lamai says standing up that's going to be a little bit less than respectful. Ultimately, one should not. You might have thought that maybe if you see an old person approaching, a zaken approaching, you don't see him in order to avoid standing up for him. This entire mitzvah is given over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You might be able to fool people by closing your eyes, pretending you don't see them, but you can't fool HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is incredible. How do you know that a zaken shouldn't be matriach? In other words, that if a zaken could find a way to walk around without causing to stand up, that's ideal. This is incredible. Sometimes in life you could be obligated to give you covet, but there's also kinds. Just because people are obligated to give you covet doesn't mean that what you should exercise that right. There's something to be said for not causing people in a position of an inconvenient position. So sometimes a person who you have to stand up for, stand up, it could be a shtickle inconvenient. So how do I know that even if I'm the person who other people are obligated to be mechabed, I should try to avoid triggering those kibbutz situations so as not to inconvenience them? Tamalomar zaken v'yareis. Isi ben Yehuda Omer. Isi ben Yehuda says mipnei seva takum afilu kol seva mashma. Isi ben Yehuda says the truth is mipnei seva takum abosai applies to every single old person. Whenever you encounter an old person, there's an obligation to honor them and an obligation to stand up for them. So the Gemara says Rabbi Yossi Aglili Hainu Tanakam. Rabbi Yossi saying something as Tanakamo. Ika benayo yonik v'chacham. We'll say, watch this. Here's the interesting nafkamina. What happens if you have a person who is biologically young but very wise? Is there an obligation to stand up for such a person? Tanakama savar yonik v'chacham lo. Tanakama holds no. Mipnei seva takum ba'adarta penei zakin means you're only obligated to honor someone who's old, but someone who is young, no matter how wise he may be, there's not a mitzvah of kibbut. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says no, even if he's young and wise. In other words, we'll say, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the concept of seva, zaken for that matter, is wisdom. It's not really as much about biological, it's just often age, advanced biological age and life wisdom tend to go hand in hand. But if you have who's young but exceptionally wise, one should mechabe that person. So that's Machlokes Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakamo. Logic. So if ultimately again you're correct, like the Tanakama said, why not put seva and zaken together? If the obligation for kibbut is only on someone who's elderly, however we're defining elderly, why not put seva and zaken together? Why does the Torah split seva from zaken? To teach us that there are two different categories. Both say zaken is someone old. or ultimately, Seva and Zakin is someone wise, even if they're young. You're obligated to give cover to both of them. Shmamina, Hafilu Yiranach Vechachim. The Tanakama, we shouldn't buy the Mismach, Zakin, the Eresa. Tanakama says, no. The reason why the pasuk is structured that way is because you have to juxtapose Zakin and Yeresa for the drasha we had before. The Tanakama, my taima, what's Tanakama to a young wise person? Today's daf, right? Mipnei seva takum v'hadarta. Right, we may save a takum vadarta arta penei zakin. It wasn't written that way. But say 33a saying that seva and zakin are the same person. Seva and zakin refer to an elderly person who is wise. The thing is like this: it is assumed an elderly person is wise. That's the default assumption. An elderly person who you know is a rasha, you're not obligated to stand up for that person. But an elderly person, by definition, because of their life experience, is automatically considered to be wise, and therefore Allah Lamaisa there is an obligation for kibbud. So Gemara says, listen to this. It's actually fascinating. So how do we paskin, by the way? This is actually an interesting machlokas. I will agree that if you have an elderly person, right, again, whether a Talmud Chacham or not is irrelevant. Obligated to an elderly person. Why? Because at the end of the day, halakha, they're considered zesha kana chachma, right? What about a young wise person? Rambam and both paskin want obligated to give covet to such an individual like this. That there is like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that ultimately again there's seva and there's zaken, two different people. Seva is an old person who is wise. Zaken zesha chacham is even a young person who is wise. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Amar Mar, you might have thought that maybe you're obligated to give covet ultimately again to an older person with money, financial means. So the Gemara says, Tamalomar takum ba'adar makima shein kids, just like standing up does not have financial cost. Af hider she'ein bo chisaron kids. So Rabbi say in the case of hider of honor is also when there is no loss of money. The kima last be chisaron kids. So I'll say, but one second, standing up doesn't always come without a financial loss. After all, milakinan the kanakiv marganisa adli kami kamei ubatim malachto. I'll say just to give you like a contemporary example. A guy is a jeweler and he deals with fine gems. So you know how it is. Like when you're dealing with those fine gems, you get in your zone, right? And you have your particular finger dexterity lined up. If you have to stop and put everything down and then stand up, that's a loss of money. That's loss of money. That's a potential loss of income. To which the Gemara says, Ella akishimala here. We compare standing up to hider hider she'ein bo bittul, just like Rabbi say hider ultimately there's no bittul. Afkim she'ein bo bittul. So Rabbi say this is very important. If the only way that I could honor an elderly person is by standing up in a way that is going to cost me money, right, financial loss, I'm not obligated to do that. The only time there's an obligation to go ahead and may save talking about darta penei zaken is when I could do so without a financial loss. Good. Both say this is incredible. Workmen, laborers, right? Tradesmen. Craftsmen. Good. Okay. Good. Workers, right? Craftsmen. The reason I'm saying it is because what omnios refers to is sometimes also like a little bit like skilled labor. So Bali Omnios are not obligated to stand up for Chachamim during their workday. Well, say, isn't that fascinating, right? So let's say, for argument's sake, I work for a diamond dealer, right? And I'm in the middle, and Tam Chacham walks by. I'm not obligated to stand up. Why, Rabbi? Say why? Because if I stand up, what does that represent, or potentially represent? A loss of income. Obviously, if I'm on a lunch break, okay, that's something different. But Lamaisa, if it represents a loss, I'm obligated to do so. Is that true? V'lo? Vatnan, kol bali omnios omdim mipneihem shalom b'shlomim ba'ormula. Incredible Mishnah by Bikurim. By Bikurim, the halacha is that when they would bring the Bikurim to Yerushalayim, everybody would shut their stores, right? And all the craftsmen, right, would stop working, and they would come and would speak to bring the Bikurim, and they would say to them, so beautiful, first wide line, Chevra, who's coming from so and so place, because remember, people would bring Bikurim from different regions at different times. So everybody would shut down, and they would go out and greet all people bringing Bikurim. They give them a Shalom Aleichem. So both say, now again, so you see from here, to greet the Bikurim bringers, they would stop working. So if you're stopping to greet the Bikurim bringers, then B'pashtos, then what? You should stop to go ahead and give kavod to a Talmid Chacham. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. It was dafka for the people who brought Bikurim, that they would stop their work and stand up. Ultimately, again, for Talmidei Chachamim, they would not. Why Rabbi says incredible. Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, Barabin, Bo Urei Kama Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. Both say you can see from here how special a mitzvah is when it is performed at its appointed time. Shar Mipneihem Omdim, Mipnei Techachamim Ein Omdim. I both say this is the power of a mitzvah. Sometimes a mitzvah has great Talmud. Right? So if you're a worker, you cannot go ahead and stand up in the middle of your work to give kavod to Talmud Chacham. But when they bring the Bikurim out of kavod for the mitzvah, that you could stop your work. Furthermore, the Gemara says, V'dom Shani Hasam De'imkein Atmach level. Both say there's actually another interesting idea over here, which is as follows: that there was a concern if they wouldn't shut first to greet the Nevi'ei Bikurim. Both say what could happen? You have these guys schlepping from all over Eretz Yisrael to bring their Bikurim. So imagine you come to Yerushalayim and what? And no one greets you. So how is that going to make you feel about your journey? How's it going to make you feel? Like it was a waste. I'm not doing this again. So therefore, maybe in order to assure future encouragement, ultimately, Bikurim, they will shut their stores and go ahead and greet everyone. Both say, by the way, an exceptional Musar Haskell for us to learn about also Erev Rosh Hashanah, especially the chaver that's davening here. Actually, wherever you daven, anywhere you daven Yom Norah, there are always new faces. There are always people. I will say, sometimes what makes or breaks an experience is how the indigenous chaver greet them. When you walk into a shul that's maybe not your regular shul, maybe not one that you frequent all the time, and no one gives you the time of it. No one offers you a machzor, a siddur, a place. I don't even mean like an invitation for lunch. We're not. Forget about that right now. Just a shalom aleichem, just a siddur panim yafal, just a hello. Let's say you'd be surprised the person could say, what do I need this for? This is by Bikurim, which is a mitzvah d'oraisa. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells you to bring your Bikurim. And yet we're still concerned that if the chevra doesn't get the right greeting in Yerushalayim, what's going to happen? They're not going to come back again. Allah has come, person walks